Matt Brown. It's that time of year. It's cold and flu season. I have a lingering cold from this weekend, Matt. I apologize. One of the things I wanted to bring up with you, because you have such a good perspective on everything and extra points, covers all this. And I wrote down 10 things I wanted to talk to you about today, and then the Bro Prabula thing happened, and I was like, I forgot about all of them. I'm sure I'll get to it, but Bo Prabula from Penn State is their backup quarterback, and a guy who, now that Drew Aller is coming back, is not going to be the starter next year, but could probably be a starter somewhere else. He played really well in backup duty and in, certain situational play calling for them, but he's got to jump into the portal. Preston Stone from SMU also in the portal if he wants a chance to play, and their teams are in the playoff. How does the NCAA fix this so it's not such a headache for the 12 teams that are experiencing this right now?
It's a really good question, and I wish that there was an easy answer, because it isn't just so simple as saying, okay, well, we'll just make the portal open in the middle of January, and it'll be after all of the postseason's over and after everybody has a chance to see through the playoff. Because unlike every other professional league or major league, this is tied to the academic calendar. You need to, if you want to play college football next year, you need to be enrolled somewhere else, which means you need to go apply and get those transcripts going. And you can't do that on January 15th because the semester's already started. You might be able to get away with it a couple of days into the new grading period. But if you're trying to transfer at the end of January, you might not get your credits in time. You might have to miss spring practice. You might have to miss these other things, which is not going to be appealing to players. So unless you move it earlier, which I have it open up during the season, which I don't think is really practical for coaches and everybody else that's trying to plan week to week. I don't really know if there is a good solution here other than completely divorcing this from academics, which is maybe where we end up going eventually, but probably not immediately.
Could you let them enroll at their new school, take online classes, and then just get a waiver for the playoff?
If you can get enough online classes that are willing to accept somebody 3 or 4 weeks into the season and still meet baseline eligibility requirements, and I don't think university presidents are going to be okay with wholesale just waiving everybody else. Sure, you can go take this class that doesn't really matter for a couple of months until the spring grading period starts. It may work at some schools, but it's not going to work at most of the ones where I think Bo's going to want to go. It's not the way that R1 research institutions work.
Matt, what do you think of where we have arrived here in the postseason, where bowls are about to start up now, but we have this expanded playoff? Does it feel like college football still? Does it feel like we're kind of turning the corner a little bit to where the playoff takes all of the attention and the bowls are mattering less than they have maybe in years past? And I know we've kind of maybe been having that discussion as it is in years recently anyways, but now that we've arrived in the 12-team era, does it feel differently in bowl season to you at all?
It doesn't to me, only because I think that the pre-January 1st games have stopped mattering for a decade now.
Fair enough,
the playoff isn't new. We've had a playoff since 2014. And while, before the portal, it was more likely that if somebody made the Rose Bowl or the Cotton Bowl, they would play in it. And then we saw what that became to be less and less. But if you're a power conference team and you're playing a bowl game now, your season was a disaster. Everyone's hit the portal. There's no sanctity or historical tradition of being some 6-6, 7-5 team playing in a bowl game that changed sponsors every 2 weeks. The thing that I don't think a lot of fans always appreciate when they get angry about players or angry about bowl season not mattering very much is that it's kind of an open secret that it hasn't mattered for coaching staffs for a while, because you know who else is trying to look for another job, another landing spot right now? Assistant coaches and head coaches and operations staffers and GAs, and almost everybody in the building is kind of playing musical chairs right now. So no one is treating bowl prep for a game that's being played on December 22nd with the same rigor as a week 6 conference matchup or anything. And so if none of them can handle it, I think the real move is to legitimately do what the Pop-Tarts Bowl does, or the Cheez-It Bowl, or the Duke's Mayo Bowl, if you want people to care about you, you just have to get extremely stupid, because the history and the inertia that carried you for the last 60 years, it's not there anymore. You can't take this stuff seriously.
What are your thoughts on the kind of run it back theme of the coaching carousel this last week?
Yeah, it might be changing now, right? With Wake Forest just got an opening 90 minutes ago.
Yeah,
there may be a couple of other power positions that end up opening up over the next couple of weeks. What I think you are kind of seeing between what places opened up, who those places hired, and even like I think earlier today and the past couple of days with coaches being willing to donate some of their salary or give it back, is that schools realize that in the revenue sharing era and in the NIL, the major big budget NIL era, few places have the boosters that could swallow a $30 million plus buyout and fork over $14 million next year for the team's budget, for the payroll and everything else that comes with it. Eventually, there's a limit. And I think now we're seeing it, where some guys that probably would have been fired in 2021, 2022, I think it makes sense for the school to realize, hey, if we wait 2 years or we wait 18 months, this buyout becomes much more manageable. Let's see what he does with actual good players. Or let's see what he does with a more competitive budget, and just trying to do it that way, which ultimately I think makes sense. Virtually anybody that spends any amount of time looking through college sports budgets or the finance behind the sport would tell you unquestionably college football head coaches and assistant coaches are overpaid. And the only reason that you pay $1 million to a strength coach and $1.2 million to a running backs coach is because you're not paying the labor. Now that you're paying the labor, yeah, you're going to begin to see a redistribution of money away from head and assistant coaches and away from their buyouts to team payrolls.
What do you think about Bill Belichick and what he's trying to do at North Carolina, which is, redo the whole way that everything's done?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm interested in what you guys think about this too, or your listeners, because the idea of a college saying, all right, we're going to go really heavy into NFL experience. We're going to have a different, coaching leadership model that's going to really mirror the org chart that you see in the NFL. And our whole pitch is that we know what it takes to get to the NFL, and we're going to help players get there. That's not a new pitch. That was Herm Edwards at Arizona State. Like I saved all of the headlines. We get that a couple of times a decade. It usually doesn't work. But those guys are not Bill Belichick, who's forgotten more about punt coverage than any of us will ever know about football. Part of what I think is curious here is I think that there's some quote, I think it was from Matt Hayes or from a couple other reporters, about guys, North Carolina is going to have a $20 million NIL budget. And now they've got Dr. Brain as their head coach. Like, they're going to be unstoppable. Guys, everyone in the ACC is going to have a $20 million NIL budget. That's called the house settlement. Everyone in the league's opting in. Yeah. Everyone in the league is going to be funding that nearly to the fullest capacity. So that's not an overwhelming game changer anymore. Wake Forest is going to have almost that same amount of money. I think it's a very interesting question to kind of see here, how trying to double down on, we know the NFL works in a world without salary caps, without a collective bargaining agreement, without any kind of roster rules whatsoever. Maybe it'll work because Belichick's a genius, but what works for 28-year-old professionals and what works for 20-year-old students who don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex is a very different thing. And there's a reason it typically doesn't work so well going from the NFL to college.
Matt, do you, I think it's going to be one of those things. It's a home run or a loud out, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to either revolutionize the way things are done, or they're going to be like, well, we'll strip this idea for parts. Maybe we need to have a general manager that's talent acquisition and separate that from the coaching staff altogether. But other than that, in 3 years, I know that things can move faster, but this is also a football program that for the better part of its history has been the other sport at that school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we were to sit here and make a list of the sleeping giant program, so it's with this brand and this geography and these resources, this should be so much better than they are. This is right up there. It's right up there with Maryland and Arizona State. And sleeping giants typically stay asleep for good reasons. This is not an SEC booster football culture. The idea of having an org chart that splits the GM and the head coach, that's not new. That is, certainly at least not new and unique to North Carolina. That's going to be probably close to standard across most of the Power Four. It's already happening in mid-major college basketball. What I think is so fascinating is who that GM tends to be, because the very, in vogue thing to do right now in major college football is go hire somebody who is tied to NFL salary caps. Anybody you can get from NFL front office, you possibly can. They've all got quants. But that job is extremely different in the pros than it is in college. And I don't necessarily know if that framework translates the same way as maybe bringing in somebody from the legal world or the entertainment world, or maybe even another coach. We're gonna find out in a couple of years, but I certainly don't think any of this is settled wisdom.
Do you think, like, one of the things I think that's going to be interesting to see is how do, like, when you've got a Deion Sanders that's not going to go into people's houses and recruit, and Bill Belichick, who's probably not going to, like, I doubt he's going to go into people's houses and recruit all that much. I mean, he might make an exception, like Deion, I'm sure, makes an exception for the big swings, but how do you do that when, like you said, these are younger guys? The relationship with a position coach matters way more in college than it does in the pros. If I'm about to sign with the Lions, I probably like the position coach that I'm going to go sign with, but it's not really a deal breaker most of the time. As we're in college, we've seen people, jump into the transfer portal because the position coach leaves, as if he was supposed to be the cornerbacks coach at Auburn for the rest of his life. So it's a very different dynamic. How do they separate that out personnel-wise and make it more NFL? Like, I just don't see how it culturally works.
Right, because you don't recruit in the NFL. Yeah. You have signed people to contracts, and they are typically multi-year contracts, and so there's not as much attrition from season to season. And then you go out and you hire people. You have free agency, and that tends to be a much more transactional experience. It's not so much like, hey, I'm signing with the Lions because I fell in love with the coaching staff, and I grew up in suburban Wayne County, and the powder blue means so much to me here. No, it's because they're paying me the most money, or I'm getting the most playing time, or it meets my professional goals. And you can do that in college to some extent, but I think we're already seeing some data that shows the limitations of trying to completely rebuild your team in the transfer portal. It can work once. It's very difficult to work more than once. I think Florida State's a good example here. I would imagine Indiana is going to regress significantly next season. James Madison did this season. It worked this year for Arizona State, might not work the next year. That's not typically how you build a program. But the other interesting thing about all this is that Bill Belichick isn't there to build a program. We've seen his contract buyout. The guy could leave after 1 year. If somebody else in the NFL decides to give him another chance, he's going to be gone. Man's 73 years old. He might just wake up and decide, like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'd like to sleep in past 4 o'clock in the morning and be done. So you could also have somebody who's now incentivized to take a very high risk, high reward roster construction strategy, knowing that if it doesn't work out, he's probably not going to be there. And if it does work out, maybe that's a trade Carolina fans would be happy to make.
All right, the CFP is this weekend. We're at the jumping off point. What do you think will be the things that jump out to people that are different? How do you feel also about? Look, you're an Ohio State guy. They're not controlling their own home game. They're treating it. The NCAA is running it, or the CFP is running it like it's an NCAA tournament game, which I think is a huge mistake. I think that they can't treat college football like basketball. Basketball's a different thing. You have a host site. You can have 100 teams there. It's not really that way. What do you think people will notice that's the different things about it?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think there's going to be two. There's a lot of cold weather games happening this weekend here, and we're not used to seeing games on these sites in open air stadiums this late in the year. I want to say the weather report in Columbus is going to be around 23, 24 degrees. And it's, there's a lot of Northerners on Tennessee's roster, ton of Southerners on Ohio State's roster, but how that impacts the passing game, how that impacts the players' mental discipline throughout the game, I think that is going to be interesting because it's just not something we're used to seeing. And to your point, these games are not likely to look or feel like traditional home games, not just because of how the tickets are distributed, because it's run by the College Football Playoff, and it's not going to be 50-50, but there's going to at least be 30% Tennessee fans, in Columbus. There's going to be a lot of Hoosiers in South Bend, but the programming and how the scoreboards work and the pregame music and everything, it's all set up differently to be a slightly more of a neutral field experience. So I think if you were at one of those stadiums and you were expecting a home game environment like you had 4 weeks ago, it's not going to be there. Not that I don't think teams like Notre Dame and Ohio State are going to have significant advantages being at home. They definitely will. But it's going to be a new thing. These are not places that are used to hosting games or having these kind of events during the year. I'm especially interested to see what it's going to be like at Penn State, because that is not an easy place to get to. Columbus is at least a big city. South Bend is at least a city, and there's hotel access in many small towns in Michigan and all the way up to Chicago, and you could stay in Chicago. State College is in the middle of nowhere, and if I wanted to go to that game, brother, I'd start driving now.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it, Matt. I'm very excited.
Yeah.
What do you think about them? Like, do you have any predictions on the matchups?
I like Indiana to make a real game of it against Notre Dame. I think Indiana's offense is positioned to still give good defenses a real run for their money. They're uncomfortable to play against. The Ohio State game was on paper was a blowout. I don't think it was really as bad as the final score indicated. You had like a defensive touchdown and some other kind of craziness happened. I think that should be a close game for more than Notre Dame is comfortable with, given their long history again with Indiana. And obviously, the biggest game is the Ohio State Tennessee game, because if Ohio State loses, especially badly, regardless of what Ross Bjork does, I think Ohio State fans might perform a citizen's arrest on Ryan Day. I just psychologically, you almost don't see how that can continue. And it's kind of a weird matchup, because Ohio State, I think, is going to struggle to run the ball against Tennessee. That their offensive line is extremely beat up. I could definitely see that game looking like another 16-13 game like Ohio State just had there. It's impossible to overstate how much anxiety is in the balance of that particular matchup.
Oh, if Tennessee wins that game, I would not want to be Ryan Day.
If that's the case, I don't think Ohio State is going to fire him, if only because of how expensive the buyouts are and how many assistants they have on multi-year coaches. But I think there will be a mutual decision, and maybe I'm making mutual on air quotes here, that Ryan Day might be spiritually and just professionally happier as the new head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, or as the offensive coordinator for the Chargers, or something else that's outside of college football, and he makes that decision willingly and maybe gets a $20 million check.
Yeah, I think that I would not. I mean, again, if that didn't happen, man, what a year that would be. I mean, it would just be holy cow. I would move. I would move and not tell people. I would get a condo and have security and just pop into the.
I think that's part of it. That's in many ways Ohio State, and I would consider Texas and Alabama and a couple other places in this category as dream jobs, because yes, you can win a national championship there. You can recruit just about anybody that you would want. You're going to make $10 million a year. You're going to have some of the best facilities and best resources that you can get. And Ohio State specifically is probably the most recession-proof program in college football. They've only been bad 2 or 3 years since the 50s. Mm-hmm. But the pressure is enormous, especially in a place like Columbus that, yes, technically has other professional sports teams, but come on, they don't. This is the only thing that matters. The new governor is going to call a press conference if you lose to Michigan State. The way that you have lost to Michigan is completely breaking the brains of many 40 and 50-year-olds throughout the area. And if you win 94% of your games and lose Michigan, and lose your bowl game or lose your championship game, it will not be worth it. Just like I don't think it is worth it to be a 9-3, 10-2 coach at Alabama. Even if they don't fire you, you would be so miserable it wouldn't be worth the $10 million. You'd be happier at Troy, and maybe something like that happens here.
Matt Brown, Extra Point. Subscribe to it. It's unbelievable. It's great information every week. Matt, thank you. We love getting you whenever we can.
You bet. Thanks, fellas. Appreciate
All
you
right.
having me.
Happy holidays, Matt. That is Matt Brown from Extra Points.